Okay, I'm going to just kick this off. Our next panel, Enhancing Army Readiness to Prevail in Contested Logistics. And today, to moderate this panel, we're privileged to have Dr. Bruce Jette. He's certainly a friend to AUSA. He's the president and CEO of Innvistra, LLC, a graduate of the United States Military Academy with a Bachelor of Science degree in Nuclear Engineering and Chemistry. Also holds a Master of Science degree and a doctorate in electronic materials from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. As many of you know, he was our Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology from 2018 to 2021. We're very happy to have you, Dr. Jette, and over to you for the panel.
Well, thanks so much. Logistics, okay, the ASALT in the middle of it, or the former ASALT. Let me do a couple of things here first. I want to echo Steve Rodriguez's comment earlier about acknowledging General Sullivan and his passing. I got to be his science advisor when he was the chief. We were really close because he was all about trying to figure out how to do digitization of the force. Spent a lot of time. He gave me, when I graduated from MIT, I finished my doctoral defense at 3 p.m. He gave me all the way till 6 o'clock to be on an airplane and show up at a conference, an AUSA conference in Florida, which is where I met him, and then went on. I can remember good and interesting times trying to write down ideas about digital force. In fact, I had a frame in my office when I was the ASALT. I had written a paper about digitization, and you double space that for him to make his notes on, and every word, every line was rewritten from geek to general, and it's it. So he remained a great friend and mentor, and so I'll miss him. I'm glad we've got the memory, at least will stay alive in the name of this hall. B.G. Haley brought up logistics across Scotland PF. That's absolutely critical. You can't think of this as just a pile of stuff. This problem, as much as the last panel and our keynote speaker has mentioned, is something that starts at the beginning and goes to the end of logistics here in the States, transit, from the source. And so the whole, how this all integrates and how we do it efficiently so we can afford to do it is going to be a critical issue as we try to look at how we solve these problems. I'm thrilled to hear that there's going to be a conference on the industrial base. My last congressional hearing, I kind of coaxed them into having a hearing on the industrial base. There's the organic industrial base and the industrial base. The organic industrial base is that which is owned by the military, and it's extremely weak. And I'm probably being gracious. We have single points of failure in a lot of places, and we really need to resolve that problem. The commercial industrial base, as everyone in this room that's in the industry side knows, is a tremendous problem, and COVID just brought that out as we saw the weaknesses in our supply chain. I used to get that doohickey, and now I can't get the doohickey. Why can't I get the doohickey? Because it's got a Watsits in there that comes from China. Okay, and China's got COVID. Well, China gets COVID, it shuts down, and all of a sudden you can't get Watsits to go into your doohickey so you can make a weapon. Okay. General Brown brought up contested logistics. We have lived, I spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan in uniform, and a number of other places. And our logistics, I'm not saying that logistics aren't challenges and challenging, but contested with a small c as opposed to a large C. We weren't getting our ships sunk, our airplanes shot down. We weren't, cyber wasn't an issue, et cetera. And I'm sure we're going to hear some interesting perspectives today on those type of things. So it's, and it's not a Navy issue, and it's not an Air Force issue. It's true. Logistics truly is an Army issue. The Marines, I mean, I don't know, they got 4 loggies or something in it. I'm not sure. You know, basically, yeah, and there's one of them. We got one. The other 3 are out there piling stuff up someplace, which they got from the Army. So you know, the Army supplies everybody. The Navy has a critical piece in getting logistics from point A, point B, but as we've talked about today, the Army has its own role. I just am always proud to say that we have more boats, because I got told don't call them ships, boats, than the Navy has ships. And that's a significant responsibility and task that's on the Army's shoulders, all in the logistics area. You know, this problem, as I said, starts literally at the mines. When we get down to talking about logistics, a lot of people think about the bullets, but what about the chemicals that go into the bullets? What about the metals that go into the bullets? Where did they come from? You got fuel trucks. Where did the fuel come from? Okay. What have we done for our strategic stockpiles? How deep are they? How have we depleted them lately? There are a lot of times lately that for, and it's been brought up, that you got a competition issue between the military need and the defense need. During World War II, the nation got behind it. Rubber went to the military, not to, you know, you patched your tires, you didn't replace your tires. We have some of those same problems going on right now in what gets allocated commercially versus what gets allocated to defense. So I just think that when we think of the logistics issue, there's this issue of the industrial base ties to the logistics base, ties to the transportation base, all goes through things from stem to stern. So I'm really tremendously happy that you're working this problem. Thank you. I will add 2 cents to a couple little comments that have been made earlier. Maybe 4 cents. Digital twins. We need digital twins of everything. It's insane that we don't have a digital environment in which to both work our material requirements, number 1, and number 2, see if we can transform that in such a way that we can exercise our logistics, our training, our soldier experience, all of that before we start bending metal. We tried to make that change with option-only manned fighting vehicle, and it has progressed, I think, significantly. 3D printers. I think 3D printing is great, but much like some of the other things that have been discussed, we need to make sure that we have a realistic view of it. Simply printing a 3D bolt doesn't equal a bolt. So being a material scientist, there's a lot more to think about as to how we make sure these things work. But if you do it, you can make a lot of advancements. IP, MOSA. Okay, the Army cannot afford to own everybody's IP. It's not only economically impossible, it's just not useful. We have I'm not going to name programs we bought the IP right at the beginning. So we now have I'm just using dates. But they're not that far off. We have now the IP for a 1987 Stutz Bearcat, which we can then have industry replicate. So what? I had a friend who owned was it the Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow, the real neat one with the front. It was a 1960 vintage car. At the time, the penultimate automobile in the world. He had it in his garage. I offered. I said, I'll get one of those little hats. I'll drive you around. He says, leave in the garage. He says, my Toyota has more features than that thing. So what we don't want to do is own the IP for the 1960 Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow when we need a Toyota with all the modern features. And so I think that modular open systems architecture is what's going to drive industry to being more flexible with their IP. It'll give you more options, those of you who are on the inside. And I think it'll pay dividends. It's more difficult to manage, but it's more important to manage. Last little comment is we need to consider inside of the logistics process, we need to consider what we're going to ask for legislatively. There are tremendous, so I used to, good number of you that know me, it's my mantra. When I was the ASALT, I'm not going to do anything illegal, immoral, unethical. Stupid I do every day, okay? The laws just drive you to stupid things. They drove me, I'm sure they're driving you. What laws do we need to get on the legislative calendar to be changed and adjusted because they were written in 1942? There are mil-spec requirements for wooden ammo boxes that are based upon whether or not a mule pees on it. That was how some of the original why are we forced to do these things? We need to go back and look at some of the things that drive us on these areas and make some significant changes so that we can kind of leverage, like, I don't know, blow molding and things like that. I testified to this in right before I left. DNAN is a primary component in our explosives. Do you know how much we manufacture in the United States? Zero, not an ounce. It's all imported. And it's imported basically from India. So you think about contested logistics. You got to get that stuff from India to here so you can turn it into something to send it back out there. Or is that what you want to do? Do you want to get partners? Do you want to look around for partners that can take ours and turn it into things? If we do that, how do we make sure the partners remain qualified? We had a ammunition producer in Korea who used to produce ammunition for us, all NATO qualified rounds, all good stuff. We cut them off, produced it because Lake City needs more work, sent it out to Lake City. Lake City produces it. That company still produces great ammo. In fact, frankly, half of the machines that they used to produce the ammo were actually the machines we replaced in the 1950s in Lake City. But they still run giant behemoth machines. Lake City's a 50s modern. But we don't have qualified rounds. Could they produce our rounds? Certainly. But we have no policy, and we may have some legislation in the way that would make it difficult for us to be able to produce ammunition in other places in the world and then store it and then transport it much shorter distances. But we have no strategy or policy put in place. Okay. So I'm going to stop there. I will tell you that from a logistics standpoint and an Army standpoint, I got it in the Pacific. You know, General Brown's got all sorts of experience in this area. Last I checked, Navy, Air Force, we're not here to control the fish and birds. Okay, in the end, it's stuff that you get done on land, and the logistics and the resources that we can and people we can manage. So the Army is critically essential to the Pacific, and I just it's just a message we have to make sure people get across. So let me go down my line here on the panelists. I'll give a short intro, and then they'll be able to yammer a little bit too. Mr. Rick Marsh joined the Army G4 staff as the Director of Maintenance Programs and Policies in August of 2021. Clearly, he's brilliant because he's half the age of everybody else in the G4. He oversees programs as well. He was the functional chief representative for civilian assigned to maintenance career field as well. Let me tell you, that's one of the things I think is also a logistically an important issue with logistics, is making sure you're developing people appropriately. Mr. Marsh also served as a director of Defense Personal Property Management Office and the deputy J54 at U.S. Transcom. He has all sorts of degrees, bachelor's of arts from in foreign affairs and military Middle East studies from UVA, master's of science from in intermodal transportation management from the University of Denver, and master of arts degree from the National Security and Strategic Studies from the Naval War College. Does that last degree really count? It's the Navy, you know, and was a significant defense senior leader development program recognition. Colonel Henry served as Special Project Officer for Cyber Information Operations for the Adjutant General of Maryland, with duty at the National Guard Bureau. Previous assignments include Chief of Staff at Maryland National Guard, also dual-hatted. I'm going to run through the list of commands because she apparently doesn't like to be a staff officer. So she commanded the 291st Digital Liaison Detachment, Task Force 291, 58th Expeditionary Military Intelligence Brigade, commander of the 110th Information Operations Battalion, 56th Theater Information Operations Group, 29th Mobile Public Affairs Detachment, and other stuff. Okay. She's been deployed to Bosnia, Herzegovina, Iraq, New Orleans, which is probably her most dangerous assignment, and Afghanistan, plus numerous deployments in Maryland. She holds a bachelor's degree in mathematics from the College of William and Mary, a master's degree in computer science from Hood College in Maryland. She was an air defender and has air defense artillery basic course and a signal advanced course. So she's got combat arms operate. So don't let the little lightning bolt thing fool you. She was also a combat arms person as well. So great background to provide us insight. And because because of her position, she also is at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab as a cyber operations engineer, and married with a couple of kids, which probably keeps her busy on the other side of things in her spare time. Christina Manning is the Director of Strategy for Global Sustainment and Modernization Division for the Defense Systems Sector at Northrop Grumman. She's been with them since 2010 and brings more than 23 years of experience in logistics and sustainment to the table. Northrop also, but to our table, that's most important. Prior to joining Northrop, she supported the Office of Special Assignment in a special assignment role for chemical, biological, defense, and chemical demilitarization programs and the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. She's also commissioned in the Air Force. I guess I have to behave. In 2009, Colonel Manning served on higher headquarters in the U.S. Air Force Staff, Air Force Reserve Staff, and Air Combat Command. She studied cellular biology and chemical engineering at the University of Kansas, holds a master's degree in military science and operations from the Air University, master's degree in strategic studies from the Marine Corps University, and a master's degree in business administration from the University of Physics, and is a graduate of the Air War College. So clearly we have a very qualified and excellent group up here. So I'm going to turn it over to each of them to provide a few minutes of comments each. And then I'm hoping that somebody brings me some questions.
All right, thanks, Dr. Jette. Thanks to the AUSA team for having us. So on the readiness front, I think about Army efforts in two main categories: what we're doing from an enterprise posture perspective, and then what we're doing to enable readiness at the unit level. As the maintenance director, a primary concern for me is the organic industrial base. We've heard that mentioned several times. AMC's embarked on a pretty ambitious 15-year modernization plan to update the ammo plants, depots, and arsenals, really getting after outdated infrastructure, ramping up ammo production, and then just making sure that all of the platforms that the Army is bringing online, the modernized platforms, we're prepared to sustain them from a tooling perspective, not only the buildings, and then Dr. Jette mentioned the people, making sure we have the right workforce in place to handle them. I know that the efforts on our domestic industrial base are essential, but will be insufficient unless we simply won't have the time, space, lift assets, to your point, to ship things across oceans and back to a fight. I'm with General Smith on the idea of pushing as much forward repair capacity as possible overseas. You mentioned the theater assets, TLSCE, MSCK, I think are well postured to take on a lot of the work that's traditionally done at CONUS-based depots, figuring out opportunities to push CONUS-based personnel forward to operate in those locations. And then General Smith, you also mentioned host nation capabilities. The facility in Poland capable of handling M1s is a good example. And like General Smith mentioned in his opening remarks, you can't talk about posture without APS. The composition and the placement and the employment is not in my portfolio, but I think those huge equipment sets really posture us well to build up that maintenance capability forward. At the unit level, General George has us energized on opportunities to give time back to units to build readiness. So things like getting rid of excess in formations and then shifting away from time-based service intervals to usage-based intervals are two examples. I was really thrilled that General Donahue suggested I had a topic. I'm disappointed she's not here, so I'll make sure any questions, I'll just refer to her to circle back with you. So I do look forward to the discussion.
She is here. Good morning. First, I wanted to thank AUSA for inviting me to be a member of this very important panel on hot topic. It's an honor to be here. One caveat, my views do not necessarily represent the views of the total Army. So my background is more, I'm sorry, my legal folks told me I had to say that. So I promise that was the only reason. So my background is on the contested part of contested logistics. So in particular, think cyber and information attacks. So as the Army is looking to project forces and equipment into theater, it's relying on commercial industry, often international, to move people, vehicle, and systems. Yet these industries are heavily dependent on the cyber domain and the information environment, as we've been talking about today already. It is dependent also to effectively operate as a business. So thinking about it in terms of profit for a lot of these companies. I have two examples from the maritime shipping industry. So sorry, I'm hitting on ports today a little bit, but ports, the maritime shipping industry, very important industry for the Army, even though we don't think of it sometimes in that context. But really two examples to highlight the threat. So first example I'm going to talk about is a little dated. 2017 NotPetya attack. I'll say it again for those of you that don't follow the cyber attacks. So the NotPetya attack, this was in 2017. It affected a large shipping company called Marsh. I might be saying that wrong. But that large shipping company controls a large portion of the global port activity. What was NotPetya? NotPetya was just a piece of malware, but it was employed by a nation state. The shipping industry was actually not its target. The target was a server farm. I'm not going to go into all the details of what happened, but the malware was able to spread globally within seconds and minutes to include to the device of an employee who happened to work at Maersk. The effects of this attack lasted weeks, delayed movement of $10 billion worth of people and goods at ports, U.S. ports as well, caused chaos among the network owners that were trying to recover from it and stop it. And there's a lot more to sort of that cultural aspect as well, as that was part of the cyber attack. But I'm going to stop there on that one so I can hit a second example more recently and talking a little bit more about information attacks. More recent situation, US protesters, only a few months ago, November 2023, guided by social media and probably other related types of messaging, all up and down the West Coast, attempted to block the loading and departure of a ship. The ship was called the Cape Orlando. You can Google it. It's out there in the open source reporting. But what's the significance? This ship reportedly was headed to Israel with US military equipment on it in today's current environment. It was eventually able to depart the West Coast, but this is a great example of the physical impacts of mal, dis, or misinformation that could affect the logistics enterprise. So malware attack, example, the use of information as a weapon, weaponizing our own population to an extent. Particularly when there is a near-peer adversary at the root of it, it's a growing trend for logistics industries, really the logistics industry's critical infrastructure being those targets. And sometimes we have a tendency to think globally, but really, looking within the homeland as well. And I know there's a whole panel dedicated to that later. But so from my perspective, and I know I'm not a logistician by trade, but I'm so happy to see all the talk today about data and cyber and integrating that into the thought process of the logisticians so that it's not being done in a silo. So looking at what can the total Army do now to keep those supply lines open in the future, knowing that most likely cyber and information attacks are going to degrade ops, and it's cheap and quick, and sometimes you don't feel it. It's not very tangible. Some in the Army, and I know we're here talking a lot about capabilities, and so sometimes we like to go to technical solutions right away. And I'm an engineer. I get it. I like to squirrel on my widgets, but I think from a lot of times we focus, and this is all still very important, but software patches, hiring more technical folks, messaging campaigns to our people that say, hey, don't click on the link. That's all important, and we need to keep doing that. Throw ChatGPT at it. There's all these kind of like things that are out there that are technical solutions. But what I'm going to talk about is proposing kind of, yes, technical readiness, but how do we pivot to enhancing strategic readiness where that technical readiness nests under that strategic readiness? I'm going to give two concepts that the National Guard is sort of tossing around. And it's really the two concepts are really in the nascent stages, but I would love your thoughts on them later. So first is the reach concept. So not a new concept at all. Doing mission from a rear location. I hear, Mr. Marsh talked about pushing certain units more forward, and with the information and cyber units, we can have them work from the rear, and then we can save some of that sea lift and airlift capacity and save some of the footprint downrange. But in order to do that, we have to invest in secure spaces in the homeland, and we have to do that now before we are at war. And I will say invest in facilities, secure facilities, and then protected data infrastructure. A lot of times we talk about the network, but from my perspective, I like to call it the data infrastructure is what we need to protect, and specifically in the homeland, where we will have more control of it. We should continue to build the capacity for our cyber and information operators to work in these secure spaces back home. I'm going to speak again with the National Guard hat on. We have started to grow an information advantage enterprise within the Guard that is uniquely postured to support the Army campaign plan objectives. Sometimes when we think of the Guard, we only think of the homeland, but definitely thinking about when we're mobilized, federally projecting force into theater, but we can do that from back home as well in a more sustainable, predictable way where you have more access to us on the Compo 1 side. Also, I can highlight, as we've been talking today, I added a note about this. I think National Guard soldiers, we sit in the nexus between industry and the military. I mean, my civilian job, I do that during the week, and I'm a part-time soldier, and I have one foot in each of those doors. And I think the National Guard, there's probably a lot more opportunity to help us, to help total Army figure out how to work with the industry. And I'm sorry, I'm going a little long, but I have one more point. The other piece, I'm going to throw out a term here called a joint interagency task force, a JIATF concept. So think joint, we've talked interagency, it includes multinational, but this unity of effort construct, the Army logistics enterprise is talking I think, to commercial partners every day, right? We're already doing all that, but how do we make that a little bit more formalized? And then from a cyber perspective, I really want to get to know the external network owners. In the cyber community, we call it the off-DODN. So later today, you might hear about the DoD network a lot, but for us, a lot of times we're looking at what is off the DoD infrastructure. So those companies, the civilian companies that own the infrastructure that we so much rely on. I was going to also highlight, so during a peace to war transition, this GIATF model could enable organizations like the National Guard. So we have dual status authority, and I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but it allows us to pivot between these different authorities under this GIATF model very easily. But we need legislation and policy to enable it, and that is not there. But to be able to deliver timely strategic effects to combatant commanders. And so really following in on what is that Army campaign plan. And I think protecting the logistics enterprise is a large piece of that. I also wanted to highlight on the international side in the Guard, we have the state partnership program. So in Maryland, every state is partnered with different countries. And in Maryland, we're so honored to partner with Estonia. And so you can think in the cyber world and the information world, we learned so much from them, and we've been with them for 20 plus years. And so we already have these relationships internationally that because we don't move around positions as much, we stay in our states, we get to continue those relationships. And then we also have a state partnership with Bosnia, which is a little different, but still amazing. So in conclusion, cyber and information attacks like NotPetya or Capolando, they already degrade the logistics enterprise in competition today, but it's very likely that we'll see these at scale. I gave a few examples. Really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on how the logistics enterprise is sort of already preparing for cyber and information attacks. And I'm sorry I went long. I owe you push-ups.
Christine.
Yeah.
So this is awesome, by the way, but I'm going to start off with a few legal disclaimers myself.
Okay.
I don't necessarily represent all the views of Northrop Grumman, the U.S. Air Force, or the U.S. Air Force Reserve, but I'm very happy to be here. I will say that listening to everyone here, and like you, a sister from another mister over here, being in both worlds and in serving in both roles and having spent a year with the Marines, spent a year with the Army, deployed, spent a year as a civilian working for a government agency, doing things off book, not supported by the military. Very interesting logistics challenges that honestly to me haven't really changed. It's just people are paying attention to it now. Sustainment is sexy for the first time. I mean, right? Can I get an amen? So what I really think is relevant though is we really have to get serious about transforming readiness decision-making and effects. And I highlight those three things because I think those three things are what is going to help the U.S. Army significantly prepare for large-scale combat operations. I don't think that we have to have this rabid lust for technology. I know my company's probably dying right now, but and the reason I say that is we want innovation and we want innovators, but I think we really want pioneers. And what I mean by that, there's technology that exists today, to your point, that if we were actually to just adopt it and apply it in a new way, you would have some of the efficiencies that could use to transform readiness decision and effects. One example, and I'll give you a little bit of time back because I definitely want to hear the questions from the audience, but if you look at hybrid energy, right, and you look at electronic vehicles and you look at reducing carbon footprints, right, some of the huge challenges of getting the 60 square million miles in Indo-PACOM that we have to overcome, over half the Earth's surface. There's some significant challenges there that we can't get to by just throwing more things that require operational energy at it. However, there are novel ways that we can leverage different innovations and apply them in a new way to get to the same conclusions. For example, one of the interesting things and one of the interesting projects I was reading about recently is taking a couple engineers who basically wanted to start a company designing flying cars, right? Went to your alma mater at MIT. in the advanced propulsion or something important. And bottom line, after talking to these guys, they actually had a patent, not for a thing, but for airflow, right? And to your point, and to a lot of the comments made today, if you can maybe design something around that patent, well, we did that, right? And we were able to basically put a microturbine that could be used for multiple applications. That same microturbine that was designed around that airflow patent can basically power anything from a group 1 through 3 up to a group 4 and 5 UAS. It could basically be used as a range extender for electronic vehicles, which I know that U.S. Army has a lot of investment in. It could also be used if I'm a maintainer in the Air Force by trade, right? I'm tired of pushing 3,000-pound generators to start airplanes. I don't know about you, right? And yeah, I'm not exactly the giantest person in the world. We could do that and scale those down and put 4 per pallet versus having 2 per pallet. And I could free up a whole C-17 worth of equipment, taking it to the fight. So my point of that is, I think we have to get over, I don't personally like the word capabilities, because I get it. The National Defense Strategy defines what we need to do. Then we come up with the capabilities we need to get it done. But to your point, we always go from capabilities to fielding, right? I want X, I want this thing. I think it would be helpful for industry, putting my industry hat on, if we were able to source and procure outcomes. What I need from the Army and what I need from all the services with my industry hat on is, I need you to tell me what outcomes you want, to your point about antiquated requirements, because the requirements are killing me. And a lot of times I have a new technology that I've adapted to apply a logistics enabling technology and capability, but I can't give it to you because your requirements are antiquated and you're buying new old, right? I want to be able to actually provide new to the U.S. Army, and not just the Army, all the services. And the only way I can do that is for folks to start looking at, hey, there's a lot of people that are going to try to sell you things, right? But what outcomes are we really asking for, right? Let the outcomes drive the KPIs. Let the outcomes drive the requirements. And if you're not sure what requirements to put in there, just ask, because I think your RFIs would get a lot more response if you left it up to pioneers and innovators to basically take existing technologies and apply them in a new way. And then you basically are able to outline your IP strategy up front. You don't need to buy the IP. You just need a strategy for IP. And you need sustainment to start and design. And then the third thing is, absolutely, if you're not actually investing a little bit more in your acquisition process to buy that digital twin, you are wrong, because I can't give you a MOSA compliant system. I want to give you all my systems need to. The Army's brilliant, and I truly applaud the Army Tactical Microgrid Standard. Can I get a whoop whoop for that? Because that is absolutely novel, and it's absolutely revolutionizing how we deliver systems. It really is. And I think that if you take those requirements, MOSA, develop an IP strategy up front, put the sustainment in the design phase like it should be, right? By having that digital twin, you reach what you were talking about earlier about basically interoperability and interadaptability and modularity. That's how you get there, right? You can always add things on. But I do think that we have such a rabid lust for technology across all the services that sometimes we buy things we don't necessarily need. And again, I don't need a Porsche if a Toyota will do. Sorry, I don't know fancy cars. I drive a Honda. So, so I will tell you, just in summary, because I want to give some time back for the questions. I really think transforming readiness decision-making effects, yes, it has a lot to do with data, but we have so much data. I also think we have to be very smart and figure out how we procure assistance in leveraging that data to make sure we get the right information down to the right echelon at the right time for basically advanced decision making, right? True decision advantage starts with the aggregation, but we also need to make sure that we're not buying Bill Gates software from different companies. No offense to Bill Gates, by the way, that's my disclaimer, just using it as an example. We're not just buying software, and we're not confusing, hate to say it, AI with ML. I see a lot of that, okay? Be careful, right? There's a lot of things to acquire, and there's a lot of things to procure, and technology can get you there, but please start thinking about outcomes that you want that technology to deliver, and not just field capabilities and confuse the term capabilities with technology. And that's my intro.
Thank you, panel, for the opening comments. So we have a few questions here, and let me see if I can summarize, because some of them overlap. The industrial base is, as we've discussed, a challenge for the logistics community. It's also a challenge for the commercial sector, because frankly, the commercial sector makes things, and so does the industrial base, organic industrial base. So how does the organic industrial base and the commercial industrial base, how can they work together to complement each other? What do we have a plan? Is there a better plan? Is there something that we ought to be trying to do? So the first stucky is going to be Mr. Marsh.
Thanks. So there was a reference earlier to the national industrial base strategy. I think there's a start there. I think for the Army, though, it fundamentally comes down to what do we need, what should only the Army do, and focus there for the organic industrial base, and then what are we comfortable letting industry do? I think that has to be the start of the discussion. You mentioned legislation before, right? And there's legislation driving what is the core capabilities that the Army must maintain as we bring on these new systems, making sure that our core designations are accounted for, and we're posturing the organic industrial base to handle those, and then being very clear of what industry should handle. And I'll pause there.
Want me to jump in there? I think you said it very well. One thing that would really help is data, right? Be clear, be upfront in your RFIs and your IFPs about what your data strategy is, and allow us to share information more collaboratively. The biggest problem I have with being able to provide prognostics, right, and proactive systems is because I can't feed my data onto the U.S. Army data fabric, right? If there was an easier way for me versus having all my folks get additional CAT cards in order to swap those out and log in between our systems, we have a hard time communicating. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, right? Zero trust is real, and it needs to be there, but there's got to be a better way for us to push and exchange data. I will say that's my ask from industry, and I would say for maybe giving back and flipping hats on that, I think the other side of that hat is we owe you a better way to utilize IP, not necessarily acquire it. And I think that's where legislation and maybe honorable moments can help, right? Advanced manufacturing, not additive, but advanced manufacturing is going to require all the services have access to TDPs and print to part capabilities, right? So tech data packages, I think we owe that back to the US government from an industry perspective, is making our TDPs accessible and then letting legislation figure out how we get compensated for that. So lessons learned from the Ukraine, right? If you're obviously all watching that unfold, is you can reverse engineer something and make it, but to your point, Dr. Jette, the material science behind that becomes a challenge. I can create a bolt, but if it's made out of paper, it's probably not going to last very long, right? That's where I think the TDPs with advanced manufacturing and additive manufacturing come into play here. So that way industry owes that to you, and then let legislation figure out how to compensate for that, whether it's through some kind of royalty payment or something of the sort. And that's a bigger, I think, ASD level question, is how do we get access to that TDP, especially in national crises? Because I think you're going to have to come up with a strategy real quick, and legislation is going to have to support that. Industry owes that to you, and from us, allow us to access your data or push data to you so that we can get the decision advantage that goes along with digitization at the right echelon at the right time.
Well, that's a great answer. And a lot of times you get a general question up here. But in this case, I've got several cards that have asked a pretty hard question, which was, okay, so legislative change that you think specifically, okay, this is the can you think on your feet moment. What specific legislative changes do you think might be supportive of the improving our ability logistically? I'm going to leave it open to the panel to voluntarily step in.
So I won't advocate for specific changes, but again, going back to the defense industrial strategy, there's currently legislation that requires us, right, the 50-50 rule, right? We can only designate no more than 50% of our depot workload to commercial sources. So if the National Defense Industrial Strategy calls for us to, the regional sustainment framework is what General Smith mentioned, leveraging allies and partners, there will have to be a decision there, an assessment of that law, if the department have additional flexibilities, right? So I think that's one example of something that would have to change.
So let me ask you a question on that, kind of extending what was there. So we've got this 50-50 rule. It's got us locked up in some ways with our ability to use our depots and arsenals. Would changing that rule improve our ability to bring industry into place and do it more cost effectively? I mean, I know a good number of our depots there are lots of parts of our depots that are just big, open, empty space because we don't have enough work for them. Would that help in our industrial base and employment in those spaces?
So frankly, my interest would be going to host nation sources first, right, before I went to a straight industry source. That's my perspective on it.
If I can jump in there, I think you might be my brother from another mother too. I think the 50-50 rule is one of the biggest constraints I face in being able to support. I'm more aerospace, so sorry, Army, I know. But you have just as many Army or aviation platforms as I do in the Air Force. But I will say the reason being is I think the answer to your follow-on question, Dr. Jette, is yes. I think I could deliver capability to Army depots if the 50-50 rule didn't exist, and not from just a legislation piece, but if there was an easier way to contract services to support those depots. Prime example, Northrop Grumman had a pretty cool structural repair tool, right, that we have. And we went to the Air Force, who was having challenges on one of their platforms. And they had to basically reverse engineer a part. In order to do that, we had to map it 3D and then do a print apart TDP, right? And then fabricate the part to repair the structural damage on a legacy platform. Getting the contract mechanism in place to support the Air Force in that initiative, because it was a depot, it took a year, right? After we got the mechanism in place for them to contract that as a service, which was the right way to do that, because again, I'm not selling them parts, I'm not selling them shiny things. I'm delivering them a service that allows them to have a capability with the logistics enabling technology, right? I know that's a lot to unpack there, but it's very, very important, because I don't want to sell you products. I want to sell you services and apply those in a new way, right? Bottom line, we were able to repair that aircraft and fabricate the part required in less than 3 weeks, but it took a year to get us on contract to do that. 50-50 isn't necessarily tied to that, but I think that industry, and if you're trying to do business and have advanced repair networks and nodes all over EUCOM and Indo-PACOM, you're going to be targeting industry more than you are host nations. You've got a strategic partner with those host nations. Having done this several times, Department of State, their organizations want their own sovereign capacity, right? And you're going to have to be able to put in the relationships and architecture to support that. So however the legislation can support us exchanging data with sovereign nations or sovereign agencies, I think Sabina Aero in Belgium, right? They've been the oldest aviation company, I think, in the world. I think they're over 100 years old. They do a lot of DoD platforms for the Air Force. Having ways and easier means of access to them may require us to overcome some legislative barriers. I just don't know what those are right now.
Great. So I think we've got time for one short question. And thank you everybody for the questions. I just got overwhelmed here all of a sudden. So if we don't get to them, I apologize. The civilian, military, and industrial partners take a look at logistics somewhat differently. And there's a bit of a big bear in the room, which is the vulnerabilities of our logistics pathways, shipping. If you get it to port, much as Christina said, you've got all these potential hurdles en route to the port. You get to the port and you find out it's owned by the Chinese. You get it onto some sort of a ship and it floats on top of the water, which I don't know, just seems to me be easier to find, and makes it more vulnerable. So what are your thoughts on how we can potentially leverage our industry partners, use cyber and all your good sneaky Pete stuff, and what we're doing inside of the DoD? That clock over there is the one that tells you you're done. Okay, so split it up. You got 45 seconds apiece.
I know. I know. Am I
You're
on? Oh, sorry about that. I'm still on the legislation question in my head. Sorry, I have lots of legislative proposals I'd like to get out, but I'll save that for another day. So I think there's no easy answer to how we protect the supply trains, the logistics enterprise. But I think what we're doing here, having this conversation, and then trying to come up with actual sort of strategic effect. What are we trying to achieve, and nesting the technology within those strategic lines of effort. And I think that, Army Futures Command is doing that. All the different organizations from the G4 down are already doing that. From a cyber perspective, Cyber Command has its own missions, but incorporating them, they're already talking to industry with critical infrastructure. Cyber Command runs various exercises. The National Guard runs exercises like we have an exercise called Cyber Shield, where we actually talk about the mod and sim piece. We actually we bring in industry and they share with us their networks, and we mod out their network, and we actually run exercises with our cyber operators using, and I doubt that it's 1-for-1 reality, but it's pretty close, because they don't want to share everything, which is good, but we do get a little bit of a taste from industry on what their critical infrastructure looks like from a network perspective. And actually this year, I'm actually going to there's another regional exercise that the Guard runs called Cyber Yankee, and we are going to add a whole information operations line of effort into that to talk through how do we respond to these, how do we protect, stop, counter even some of these potential information peer adversaries trying to weaponize information against us.
So having testified, and I'm sure all the number of you in the office, that little thing, the little red light comes on and they start glaring at you because you're eating their time. So I'm 23 seconds, 24, 25 into the red. So I'm gonna hold up. I would ask the panel if there's an opportunity at the break or a lunch to be available. If anybody would like to try and follow up with the subsequent questions that I didn't get to, I appreciate the opportunity to chair the panel. Thanks very much. And I hope the rest of the panels go well.
Thank you, Dr. Jette. Let's give Dr. Jette and this panel a big round of applause.